think you should consider postponing the wedding," my mother said, her voice carrying that particular tone I would learned to recognize over 34 years, the one that meant she would already decided I was being unreasonable before I would even responded. "With everything going on with your sister," I stared at my phone, watching Eli across our kitchen as he made coffee, humming something soft under his breath. The engagement ring on my finger caught the morning light streaming through our Portland apartment windows. Just 48 hours ago, that ring had represented pure joy. Now it felt like evidence of my selfishness. I didn't argue. I didn't defend our plans. I simply said, "Thanks for sharing how you feel," and hung up. That conversation was the beginning of the end of my lifelong audition for my family's approval. What I didn't know then was that it was also the beginning of learning what love actually feels like when it doesn't come with conditions, prerequisites, or the constant need to prove you deserve it. Looking back now, I can see the pattern that had been quietly shaping my life for decades. I was always the dependable daughter, the one who followed rules, worked hard, and never made a fuss. While my younger sister Lena chased dreams in Los Angeles, I built something steady in Portland, a successful bakery, a savings account, a life that looked responsible from the outside. I thought that responsibility would eventually translate to respect, that consistency would earn me the same consideration my family freely gave to Lena's chaos. The pattern was subtle but consistent, woven so deeply into our family fabric that I would stop noticing the threads. When Lena needed money for headshots, I wired it without question. When she called crying about another failed audition, I listened for hours, offering encouragement and practical advice she never took. When she moved back home at 29, unemployed and pregnant, I quietly started sending monthly payments to help with expenses. Not because anyone asked, that would have been too direct for my family's style of operation, but because I would learned that being the good daughter meant anticipating needs and meeting them without being told. Meanwhile, Lena got sympathy, understanding, endless second chances wrapped in phrases like "she is going through a hard time and she is more sensitive than you." I got expectations, the assumption that I could handle anything because I always had. The thing about being labeled the strong one is that people forget you might need tenderness too. They forget that strength isn't the absence of vulnerability, but the decision to keep moving forward despite it. My mother Carol had perfected the art of manipulation through martyrdom. She never demanded anything directly that would have been too obvious. Instead, she created emotional landscapes where the right choice was always clear, even if it came at your expense. She had a way of making her disappointment feel like a physical presence in the room, heavy and reproachful, until you found yourself apologizing for things that weren't actually your fault. My father, John, had long ago chosen the path of least resistance. He loved us, I think, but his love was quiet and conflict averse. When tensions rose, he disappeared into his workshop or his newspaper, emerging only when the storm had passed to offer gentle but meaningless platitudes about family sticking together. His peace-keeping came at the cost of never actually addressing the problems that kept recycling through our family dynamics. Eli proposed during a quiet weekend at the Oregon coast, in a moment that felt perfectly us. No fanfare, no social media announcement, just the sound of waves and his nervous laughter as he pulled out a ring he would designed himself. He knew I would prefer something meaningful over something flashy, something that spoke to intention rather than expense. We would been together 5 years, and he understood that my relationship with grand gestures was complicated by a family that had taught me to be suspicious of anything that felt too good. I texted a photo of the ring to our family group chat with simple words: "We are engaged." My dad responded with nice, which was actually enthusiastic for him. My mother's silence stretched for 24 hours, a calculated pause that I now recognize as a power play, though at the time it just felt like disappointment settling in my stomach. When she finally called, I expected something warm. Maybe not excitement, that wasn't her style, but at least acknowledgement of this milestone in my life. Instead, I got a lecture about timing and sensitivity, delivered in the tone she reserved for explaining why my feelings were inappropriate. "Lena doesn't even have a nursery," she continued, as if my engagement was somehow connected to my sister's pregnancy preparations. "Maybe you could help her out instead of spending all that money on a wedding." What she didn't know, what I would never told them because I would learned not to share details that might be used against me later, was that Eli and I were paying for everything ourselves. We had been saving for 2 years, setting aside money from my bakery and his photography work. We weren't asking for help or expecting contributions. We just wanted to celebrate our commitment with the people we loved in a way that felt authentic to who we were as a couple. That night, as I replayed the conversation to Eli, he listened with the kind of focused attention that had drawn me to him in the first place. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said something that stopped me completely. "You can uninvite them." I laughed because the suggestion seemed absurd. You don't uninvite your family from your wedding. That is not how families work. But even as I laughed, something else was happening. A small voice in my head was saying, "But what if you could?" "I am serious," Eli said gently. "Think about it. What if you only invited people who actually want to celebrate with us? People who don't make you feel guilty for being happy?" That night, I lay awake thinking about what he would said. I thought about other family gatherings, Christmas dinners where I walked on eggshells, trying to keep everyone happy, birthday celebrations that became exercises in managing my mother's mood, holidays that I spent recovering from rather than enjoying. I thought about how exhausted I felt after family events, how I would internalize the belief that love was supposed to be work, that relationships were negotiations where you had to prove your worth repeatedly. The next morning, I sent an email that felt like jumping off a cliff. After some consideration, Eli and I have decided to have a smaller wedding. We will not be able to include everyone we originally planned to invite, but we hope you understand. It was polite. It was vague. It was also the first time in my adult life that I would made a decision about my own life, without consulting my family first, without seeking their approval or permission. The response was immediate and explosive. My phone buzzed with texts and calls that I let go to voicemail. But it was Lena who delivered the most devastating blow. She appeared at my bakery the next morning, looking smaller than usual, her typical dramatic flair replaced by something quieter and more dangerous. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, glancing around at my customers. In private, we went to my office, a cramped space behind the kitchen that smelled like flour and vanilla. She sat down heavily, her hands shaking in what I now recognize as performance, though at the time it looked like genuine distress. "I think the baby might be Eli's," she said, her voice barely audible. The words hit me like cold water, not because I believed them, not really, but because for one terrible moment doubt crept in. Years of being told I was too trusting, too naive, too willing to see the best in people had eroded my confidence in my own judgment. Years of being gaslighted had made me question my ability to read situations accurately. "What are you talking about?" I managed, my voice sounding far away. "Last spring," she said, looking down at her hands when he came to pick up those chairs from Mom and Dad's house. "I was there alone with him. We talked, and then she let the sentence hang, heavy with implication. I knew it wasn't true. Even as she spoke, I knew. Eli had mentioned that trip, a 15-minute stop to collect furniture we would store it at my parents' house during our move. He would actually complained about how uncomfortable Lena had made him feel, how she would cornered him with inappropriate questions about his past relationships, how he would cut the visit short because of her behavior. But doubt is a poison that spreads quickly through cracks you didn't know existed, and my family had spent years creating those cracks, teaching me to question my own perceptions, to defer to their version of reality, even when it contradicted my lived experience. That evening, I sat beside Eli on our couch, watching him edit photos on his laptop, completely unaware that his character had been assassinated in my family's ongoing drama. The weight of Lena's accusation sat between us like a physical presence. "Can I ask you something?" I said finally. He looked up immediately, sensing the gravity in my tone. "Of course," Lena said. I started, then stopped. "How do you ask the person you love if they betrayed you with your sister? How do you voice suspicions that feel both impossible and suddenly plausible?" "What did Lena say?" His voice was gentle, but I caught the slight tension in his shoulders. I told him everything, watched his face cycle through confusion, shock, hurt, and finally, something that looked like disappointment, not in Lena for lying, but in me, for entertaining the possibility. "Ava," he said quietly, "I have never been alone with your sister. Not for a single moment. The day I picked up those chairs, your dad was there the entire time. We were in the garage, loading furniture. I was in the house for maybe 5 minutes to use the bathroom. The truth of it settled over me like a blanket. Of course, Eli, who had never given me reason to doubt his integrity, who had spent 5 years proving his reliability, who had designed an engagement ring with the same careful attention he brought to everything in his life. "I know," I said, feeling the full weight of what had just happened. "I am sorry. I knew it wasn't true even as she was saying it." "Then why are you asking me?" "Because," I said, feeling the weight of years of manipulation finally taking shape into words, she knew exactly how to make me question everything. She knew exactly which buttons to push to make me doubt the most important relationship in my life. And the fact that she would try to destroy my engagement out of jealousy means I cannot have her in my life anymore. That night, I removed Lena and my mother from our wedding guest list. I canceled the monthly payments to Lena's account. I temporarily blocked their numbers not out of anger, but out of necessity. I needed space to think without their voices in my head, drowning out my own intuition. The retaliation was swift and predictable. My phone erupted with messages from extended family members who had received carefully crafted versions of events. My mother called Qley directly, leaving a voicemail that I played back later with a mixture of anger and recognition. "She is overwhelmed with wedding planning. Maybe you could help her see reason." The manipulation was so transparent it would have been funny if it weren't so destructive. She was trying to triangulate, to make Qley question my mental state, to create doubt in our relationship. It was a tactic I would seen her use countless times, but never with such clear intent to damage. Lena took to social media, posting on Facebook, "Imagine being kicked out of your own sister's wedding just for telling the truth." The post was carefully worded to generate sympathy without providing context, a masterclass in victim narratives that painted me as the unreasonable aggressor. Each message was a test of my resolve. Each attempt at emotional manipulation was an invitation to return to old patterns, to prioritize their comfort over my own well-being. But something fundamental had shifted. I would spent decades trying to prove I deserved love by accepting unacceptable behavior. I was tired of auditioning for a role in my own family that I would apparently never actually been offered. Qley and I made a decision that felt both radical and obvious. We moved our wedding date up by 3 months. We kept it small, intimate, filled only with people who celebrated our joy without conditions or caveats. My Aunt Sarah came, tears in her eyes as she hugged me and whispered, "I am proud of you for choosing happiness." A few cousins attended, people who had watched our family dynamics from the periphery and understood what my boundaries meant. My father sent a card the day before the wedding, not attending, but not completely cutting ties either. It was typical of his conflict, avoidant approach. But I found myself grateful for even that small acknowledgement. The wedding itself was beautiful in ways I hadn't expected. Without the undercurrent of family tension, without the need to manage my mother's mood or anticipate Lena's dramatics, I was free to actually experience my own joy. I laughed more than I had in months. I cried during our vows not from sadness or stress, but from pure happiness. For the first time in my adult life, I was at a family celebration where I didn't leave feeling drained or guilty or somehow wrong. I left feeling loved, supported, celebrated. It was a revelation that this was possible, that relationships could be sources of energy rather than drains on it. 2 weeks after our honeymoon, Lena appeared at my bakery again. This time, she looked different. No makeup, no dramatic flair, just raw and exhausted in a way that seemed genuine. "I lied," she said without preamble. "About Qley, he is not the father. I made it up." I continued kneading dough, not looking at her. "I know. I was angry," she continued, "and jealous. You looked so happy in that engagement photo, and I couldn't handle it. I wanted to take it away from you." The honesty was startling. For once, Lena was admitting to her motivations without trying to justify them or make herself the victim of circumstances beyond her control. "The baby's father ghosted me when I told him I was pregnant," she said. "I felt so stupid. So disposable. And then I saw your ring and your happiness, and it made me realize how badly I would screwed up my own life, so I wanted to screw up yours too." I set down my dough and looked at her directly. "You tried to destroy my relationship because you were unhappy with yours." "Yes. You lied about the most important person in my life because you were jealous." "Yes." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, for the careful calculation that usually accompanied her confessions, but she just looked tired and sad and smaller than I would ever seen her. "I don't forgive you. I said finally. "I understand why you did it, but understanding isn't the same as forgiveness, and it doesn't mean I am willing to pretend it didn't happen." She nodded, tears starting to form. "I know. I just wanted you to know the truth. The truth is that you were willing to blow up my life to make yourself feel better. The truth is that you have never learned to be happy for other people when you are struggling. The truth is that you are not safe for me to have close relationships with." She flinched, but didn't argue. "What does that mean?" "It means I hope you get help. I hope you figure out how to build a life that doesn't require tearing down other people's happiness. But I am not going to be part of that process. I am not going to keep setting myself on fire to keep you warm." She left without another word, and I went back to my baking. That afternoon, I made some of the best bread I would ever created, as if the act of finally speaking my truth had freed up creative energy I would been using to navigate family dysfunction. A year passed. My mother never reached out directly, but I heard through my aunt that she would been telling people I would abandon the family over wedding drama. The narrative she would constructed painted me as the villain, which was both hurtful and oddly liberating. I couldn't control her story, but I didn't have to live in it either. My father continued sending birthday cards and occasional texts brief, careful communications that acknowledged our relationship without taking sides in the conflict. It wasn't much, but it was something, and I found myself grateful for his small gestures. Lena had her baby. A girl. I saw the announcement on a cousin's Instagram, along with photos of my mother beaming as she held her first grandchild. The baby was beautiful, and I felt a complicated mix of emotions: joy for the innocent child, sadness for the relationship with my sister that I would had to end, and relief that I wasn't caught up in the drama that I was sure surrounded this new addition to our family. No one asked me to be involved. No one suggested I should reach out, or make amends, or let bygones be bygones. The silence felt like an acknowledgement. Finally, that the boundaries I would set were real, and would be respected, even if they weren't understood or approved of. My bakery thrived. Eli's photography business grew. We traveled, we laughed, we built traditions that felt genuinely joyful rather than obligatory. We hosted Thanksgiving dinner for friends who would become chosen family, creating the kind of warm, inclusive celebration I would always imagined holidays could be. I learned that peace doesn't come from resolving every conflict or healing every relationship. Sometimes peace comes from accepting that some people aren't capable of the kind of love you need, and that is not a reflection of your worth. Sometimes peace comes from choosing yourself, especially when that choice is seen as selfish by people who benefited from your self-sacrifice. The most surprising thing about setting boundaries with my family wasn't how difficult it was, though. It was difficult, but how much energy it freed up for other relationships. Without the constant emotional labor of managing family dysfunction, I had more to give to my marriage, my friendships, my work. I stopped walking through life braced for the next crisis or criticism. I used to think I had to earn peace by being perfect, by anticipating everyone's needs, by making myself small enough to fit into spaces that were never designed for my full self. But peace, I learned, doesn't come from proving your worth to people who have already decided you are not enough. It comes from knowing your own value and protecting it, even when that protection looks like loss to people who don't understand the difference between love and control. Now, when people ask about my family, I tell them the truth without shame or defensiveness. Some relationships are too expensive for your mental health, even when they come with the label of family. Love isn't enough if it comes wrapped in manipulation, jealousy, and emotional blackmail. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away and give everyone space to grow into better versions of themselves. I don't know if my mother or sister have learned anything from our estrangement. I don't know if they have developed the capacity for self-reflection or genuine change, but I know that I am no longer waiting to find out. I am living my life, building relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care, creating the kind of family I always wanted, one where love doesn't require you to diminish yourself to make others comfortable. That is the truth I wish I would learned earlier. You can love people and still refuse to accept their dysfunction. You can hope for their growth while protecting yourself from their toxicity. You can grieve the family you wanted while celebrating the family you have chosen. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give yourself is the permission to be happy, even when the people who raised you cannot understand or celebrate that happiness.